my goodness gracious, how it opens up our mind. I mean, that's a pretty big universe. I mean, that's I think, even more remarkable than when, I don't know, when Newton figured out you could use one set of equations to figure out the elliptical orbit of the planets around the sun and to figure out the trajectory of a cannonball. You know, all matter's kind of tied together, works with the same laws. But, you know, you open up your mind to this exploding universe. Comprehend what it is that the creative power of God has done. It's extraordinary. And as more and more people become more and more connected, you keep hearing folks talk about a global connection, a global mind, as though humanity were becoming one, I don't know, giant beehive that had a life of its own. These are times that are pregnant with possibility. We're living our lives in the midst of that. We're seeking a way forward in the midst of that, but they are also dangerous times. We're dealing with a society that is moving very fast forward, but then some parts of human society are not there, and they're resisting the move, and they're becoming violent about it, and terror plagues us in our streets. It's been an unstable time economically, an unstable time in our environment. It's important right now to be able to discern the direction and the will of God, because that pregnant possibility of the next can be a gorgeous blessing or disaster. It's important to recognize where God is going, to reach out for that rich blessing. Now, the Israelites, they lived through times like this. They lived through times when things were just beginning to come together, times of rich promise, times of great uncertainty. They called that wilderness, where they were looking for the blessing, and they were trying to navigate their way through the dangers and the difficulties so that they could move in the direction of the strength and the power of God. The Israelites. And I'm not talking about the Israelites that I just read about. You know, Moses and Aaron and that crowd, and then Moses and Aaron and that crowd. Because I'm talking about the people that wrote these stories down. That's the Israelites I'm talking about, the ones that have dealt with those pregnant possibilities. And they wrote these things down because they wanted to use these stories to understand how they should move forward. I was at the Tamil Pious this week giving a lecture on truth in the Bible. It was actually a long lecture about the formation of the Scriptures. Now, if any of you are living in one of the other retirement homes around, I'd just like to say, I'm not playing favorites. They just asked me. Okay? You could ask me too. I wouldn't say no. In any case, so those of you who are there actually have had a little bit of a preview of some of what I might say, because these two stories, the one in Numbers and the one in Deuteronomy, were probably written 250 years apart for completely different reasons. Right, so the first story, the Numbers story, is written by what scholars call the J author. They call him that because this author refers to God as a Yahweh or Adonai. Right, that's how this author refers. And this author senses a dear and close God. One that you can talk to, in fact, one you can argue with. You know those wonderful passages of Abraham talking God down? You know, how many people would have to be good in Sodom to be able to save the city? You know, this is a God that engages you. It's hard for us maybe to imagine that kind of God since we don't picture it just the same way, but you know, there is a sense in which God responds to us. Oh, it's a little harder to touch, but if we pay attention, we recognize that we think we move into a world and the world responds back if we pay attention. Well, this J author was writing at the moment that David, King David, was trying to get control over all of Israel. There were 10 northern tribes, there were 2 southern tribes, and King Saul had mostly the tribes in the north, and David managed to usurp that power, and he was trying to unite both kingdoms. This was a moment pregnant with possibility. He was seeking a rich and deep blessing. just as the spies went out to find out what's the blessing out there. What is it that God has to offer us now? And at the same time, David understood that if we're going to reach out, if we're going to grasp hold of a rich blessing for our lives, a next beautiful thing, we're going to have the courage to stand. And so as David had the priests begin to gather together these stories and weave them into a narrative, it's this kind of a story that was to inspire the people of God to take courage, to rely upon God, to reach out for that rich blessing that was in the future for them. That's what that's doing there. That's what it's for. And here, this close engagement of an anthropomorphic God was intended to give great courage. And you know, if you are connected to the presence of the Spirit in this world, in this creation, you find that you feel a place in all of that, and courage does well up within you. The Deuteronomy passage, the D writer, as it's called, there are two others, E and P, but the D writer wrote this at a very different time, with a very different feeling in Israel. The interesting thing about the history of Israel is there always is a kingdom to the north and Egypt to the south. You know, Assyria, Babylon, north and east, and Egypt to the south. And Israel is able to expand and become a great kingdom under David because the powers to north and south had receded. But after David's son Solomon died, there was a split in the kingdom. You had the 10 northern tribes that used to be with Saul. They split off again, and the 2 southern tribes hung on there in Jerusalem. And finally, the 10 northern tribes were destroyed by a northern power, Assyria, that came in to take over because that began to expand. And now the southern tribes are stuck. They're stuck between Egypt and Assyria. Or ultimately, they then became stuck between Egypt and Babylon because Assyria faded and Babylon rose from the north. But each time they're trying to figure out their way. Do we ally with Egypt so that they protect us? Do we ally with the people from the north so that they protect us? Do we stand fast so that we are our own independent people? What is it that we're trying to do here? What's the path? Where are we going? So now they look back on their history. They look back on the stories that formed them as a people. And they see this same story and they begin to retell it in a different way because they're seeking a different kind of answer. And now when Moses sends out the spies, what was the difference? First of all, it was the people that asked Moses to send them out instead of God sending them out. But second, they were looking for a report regarding the route by which to go up to the cities. Where are we going, they said. What's the route? How are we going to find out the direction that God is leading us? That's why that story is put in that way, in this place. Each time, what the people of Israel are doing is reflecting on their history, reflecting on the stories that form them and give them character and purpose, reinterpreting them, trying to understand them fresh in the presence of that intimate God so that they can move forward to that next beautiful thing